Hi, my name's Gabe. I'm making this video about the golf course in Port Townsend ahead of the third open house. I'm hoping to kind of bring everybody up to speed on some of the latest information so that you can go into the third open house as well informed as possible. My interest in the golf course property mostly comes from just wondering for many years what was up with this golf course that didn't seem particularly well utilized. And since serving on the Envisioning Port Townsend Golf Course and Mountain View Commons Stakeholders Committee in the fall of 22, I've learned a lot more about the history of the property and have come to believe that the property is indeed underutilized and that the true costs are not accurately reflected in the price of golf at the Port Townsend Golf Course, especially when you factor in environmental costs. There are chapter markers in the description, so if you are interested in a particular element, feel free to look at those. And all right, let's get into it. So at the second open house, there were 4 concepts presented to the public. Folks were able to weigh in also through a survey that was conducted for a couple weeks after the open house. And the 4 concepts were a Central Park option, a restored golf course option, a hybrid golf course option, and what they were calling the Space for Nature option. The Central Park option got 42% of sticky dots. The second ranking option was restored golf, and the third was the hybrid, and the Space for Nature option got the least amount of dots with just 7%. Unfortunately, these results reflect some of the polarization in our community over this topic. Because if you combine Central Park and Space for Nature, which are the 2 concepts that either immediately or ultimately get rid of golf, you get almost exactly 50%. And when you combine the hybrid option and the restored golf option, that is almost exactly 50% as well. These results are reflective of about 1,200 people who weighed in either in person or digitally. Okay, quick review of what the options are. So restored golf is basically the golf course as it is now, but with some improvements. The hybrid course gets rid of the driving range, moves a couple of holes over to where the driving range was, and frees up about, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 acres on the south end of the property for some alternative uses, which you can see listed there. The Space for Nature option is the same as hybrid, but then after 10 years decommissions the golf course, and there's a lot of habitat restoration and a lot of walking trails. But it's kind of the option that ultimately gets us to a park, but in a more minimal form, less alternative uses. And then lastly, the Central Park option would immediately close the golf course and begin habitat restoration and a very long, slow phase in of a number of alternative uses. The next thing I want to talk about is the operations and maintenance costs, which we received at the most recent Stakeholders Committee meeting. And as you can see, the Central Park option has the highest operations and maintenance costs, $60,000 to $70,000 a year. And that makes sense since the entire property would be a park. The Parks Department said that would reflect 1 full-time employee managing the park. And the restored golf course option is $10,000 to $20,000 a year, and then the hybrid option is $30,000 to $40,000. One thing to note is that in the Central Park option, there would be significantly less mowing and therefore less gas used for mowing, and there would also be significantly less water usage, especially as the revegetation occurs. The Parks Department said, initially there would be water used to help establish the new plants, but over time, as a lot of the golf course grass is phased out and more native plants are established, then the amount of watering reduces significantly. The city is working on more of a detailed breakout of these numbers so we can see exactly what goes into them, and hopefully that information will be presented at the third open house. Now I'm going to talk about the development costs of these plans. This is the restored golf course, and because a golf course is a specialty use park, restoring our golf course would not be open to state grants. So this cost would be borne by the city. There's some discussion about the Players Club contributing toward these costs, but essentially over 10 years you have about 1.35 million in costs to improve the golf course in the ways you see listed here. For the hybrid option, the city would be able to access state grants. So while it is more expensive, you can see here a total grant request over 11 years of 4.4 million. The grants are a matching grant where the city pays 35%. That total is actually a lot lower than what you see here, and I'll show you after I go through all four options. I'll show you a table that shows the actual costs to the city. The Space for Nature option, 4.62 million over 22 years. So you can see that that's a much longer time frame for a similar cost to the hybrid option, which of course would mean lower cost per year. And then the Central Park option, 5.25 million over 21 years. So now I want to show you costs over time. So this is a spreadsheet I made showing the four concepts. This is the grant request totals. Like I said, in the restored golf course there is no grant request, but in the other ones they're here. This is the expenditure to the city. So for the restored golf course, this is that 1.4 million, and then for the other options it's 35% of the grant requests. Here we have the duration and then the average per year, so the city expenditure divided by these number of years. So for example, the Central Park option would be 87,500 per year cost to the city over the period in which that park would become fully developed. And then I've added in the operations and maintenance costs. I did not do that for the Space for Nature option. One, because that information was not presented to the stakeholders committee, and two, because that option received the least amount of support and most likely won't be included in the third open house. This column, total per year after 22 years, I wanted to just kind of create a standard time frame for each of the options. So this is the cost to the city plus 22 years of operations and maintenance divided by 22 years. In other words, exactly what the city will have spent after 22 years in all three cases. And you can see the golf course option, 76,000, hybrid option, 105,000, Central Park option, 171,000. And then I was just curious, what does it look like over time if we look 100 years into the future? After 100 years, the city will have spent about 28,000 per year for the golf course option, about 50,000 per year for the hybrid option, and about 83,000 per year for the Central Park option. And then this column is the difference per year from golf. So I wanted to know Okay, compared to golf, how much more does it cost the city per year over 100 years to have one of the two options that include some general park space? So for the Central Park option, where the public gains 58 acres of park in the center of the city, that ends up costing about $55,000 per year over operating the golf course. And then lastly, I just took that differential and divided it by the size of the property, so per acre. So the hybrid option ends up costing the city about $376 per year per acre. And the Central Park option costs the city about $945 per year per acre. Again, that's over 100 years. So depending on your position, you might think, okay, an extra $55,000 per year over 100 years for the city to develop and maintain a park, that's just not worth it. We like the golf course and we don't want to spend that extra money. Or you might be looking at it and saying, that's not that much money for a 58-acre park right in the center of the city. So now I want to talk a little bit about the new lease terms and some of the existing golf course financials. This document here shows what the existing lessee has earned over the course of the last 5 years or so, what their expenses were, what the net was, the expenses to the city, the revenue from the lessee to the city, and then therefore the net cost to the city of operating the golf course. So these numbers in parentheses here are negative numbers. In other words, the city is losing money each year by continuing the current arrangement with the lessee, which includes a bunch of free water. And so down here, this table shows you the cost of that water, which is the largest cost, not the only cost, but the largest cost to the city under the current lease terms. So what I did here to figure out the average cost to the city from 2018 to 2022 is just take this net column here and figure out the average. So about $42,000 per year from 2018 to 2022 is what the golf course costs to the city when you factor everything in, the expenses to the city as well as the revenue from the lessee. And so you can see right now the city is subsidizing this golf course, and the city wants better lease terms going forward. And what I heard at the last stakeholders committee meeting is that potentially a new lease agreement would not include the, I think, 7 million gallons of free water for course irrigation per year. So what I want to point out here is that the average cost to the city over this time frame is roughly similar to the average profit that the current lessee makes operating the golf course. So if the city does negotiate new terms for the lease that does not include this line here of all this free water, you can see that the lessee is not going to be profiting very much at the current level of usage. So unless a bunch more people start playing golf, the lessee might look at the potential of a new, less favorable lease agreement and think, I don't know if I want to do that, because there's not really great prospects for a lot of profit. And then on top of that, the hybrid option removes the driving range, which is one source of revenue for the golf course. And so we could run into a situation where even if city council approves a hybrid option going forward, that the current lessee might not want to actually continue operating the golf course, or there might not be another contractor that would want to do that. I don't know if it's going to come to that, but I just want to point that out. I'm not really sure what that means exactly, just to say that it's a possibility should the city council ultimately vote to approve a hybrid option going forward. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you here is the decision-making criteria that the stakeholders committee developed at the beginning of the process. And we revisited this in the last meeting because the restored golf course option doesn't meet about half of these criteria, and those are the ones that are underlined. And this was pointed out basically as part of the conversation about which concepts to present at the third open house. Basically, after talking about it for a while, a number of folks suggested that instead of including restored golf course as an option at the third open house, that instead we just present two choices: one, Central Park, and two, a hybrid option. And the reason for that is, A, Central Park received the most dots at the last open house, so that's pretty obvious, at least to me. And then we really want to start winnowing this down to less choices. So at the last open house there were 4 choices, and instead of presenting 3 at this next open house, some of us felt that just presenting 2 would be a better way to go. The reason to include a Central Park option and the hybrid option is because despite the fact that the restored golf course option got 33% of the dots last time, the hybrid option retains a 9-hole golf course while also giving other folks that would like to see expanded access to the property something that's in it for them as well. And so that is what was suggested by a number of people, and is, I don't know for sure, but is likely going to be presented at the third open house. The benefit to presenting those two concepts as options moving forward is that both the Central Park option and the hybrid option meet most, if not all, of the criteria that were established by the stakeholders committee. Lastly, I just want to talk about next steps. Please do spread the word about the next in-person open house on Thursday, June 22nd from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Worden Commons. Again, there will be childcare. Check the city's website, cityofpt.us, for registration info for that. At the second open house, attendance was down quite a bit from the first, and so I'm really hoping we get a lot of folks there for this third one. I do also hope that the age demographic is a bit more diverse. The last couple times it has been largely an older crowd, and I'd love to see more younger folks and families with young children there as well. The third online open house is scheduled for June 26th at 4 p.m. Again, you can find info about that on the city's website. At the in-person open house, they will most likely release the link for the third survey, which I hope a lot of people will take. That'll probably be open for a couple weeks, just like last time. On July 10th at 6 p.m., there's going to be a city council briefing with the results from the third open house, and then the following week, July 17th at 6 p.m., is when the city council will actually vote on what to do with the property. And I'm hoping that some folks want to show up and submit a public comment at one or both of those open houses. Thanks for watching, and feel free to reach out with any comments or questions.